Welcome to International Insights, stories from the real economy. My name is Schembri. Whether you run your own enterprise or work for someone else, you know that not all projects are equally important. Some simply have more consequence than others. Maybe it's the complexity of a project, the fact that it is in a different country, or because it's a chance to demonstrate what we can do. The international growth of a company is usually marked by these strategic opportunities that are like tipping points. In today's episode, we focus on these tipping points. Our guests have successfully led their companies to international growth, one opportunity at a time, but with key opportunities having a strategic impact on the organization and its direction. John DeGiorgio ran a company providing software solutions for airports until it was acquired by a group from New Zealand in 2015. On his part, Joseph Sultana started and grew a software company involved in complex system development, a company which today is also part of a larger global software firm. John DeGiorgio, Joe Sultana, welcome to International Insights. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Tell me first, John, I guess we'll start with you. Your international journey over time, looking back, what were the main milestones in that journey?
There were a series, some more minor than others, but if we were to look at the first particularly significant one was a service and product project for a customer based in Geneva and in London and also in Finland, where we had a particular technology which addressed a specific and very particular requirement that they had. And this was back in 1998.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, they're still clients of ours. And after that, we had a series of others which were much more product-led.
Okay.
So the development of a software product, which we'll probably have the opportunity to discuss some of those details around there, in 2001 and again in 2011, which led to specific international activities on a much larger scale.
Okay, so the journey was characterized in this sense by these opportunities that were kind of more important than the regular opportunities. Yeah. Joe, in your case, was the story kind of also characterized?
Similar, but different. In that when we set up shop, John and I in 2003, the vision always was to deliver primarily services into an international marketplace, right? Because we felt that if you wanted to deliver software, the climate at that time at a local level was that you couldn't do it properly because it was never seen as a strategic choice. Okay. So it was always a fulfillment of a cost. Mm-hmm. So the mindset was more about how quickly and how cheaply can we do it. And the ambition we set off with at that point was, let's find the clients where we can really do our job properly, okay, where we can deliver software.
The right kind of client.
The right kind of client. Now, obviously, in hindsight, I realize there is no right kind of client, right? And it's more of a mindset that you're looking for. So the journey for us was already set out. And I think my life I have been blessed by meeting people who have been very pivotal. And rather than milestones, for me, it was always about coming across these individuals or group who steer me or steer the ship that I was driving in a particular direction, okay, right? And I find it quite fascinating that when you look back at the impact that these conversations have with these individuals, the real impact is so far-reaching that at that point you don't even realize.
Okay, that's interesting.
And for us, and for me in particular, I always believed in a theory, the lighthouse theory,
right,
which what I call the lighthouse theory. And I try to spread this gospel. It's a bit obsessive, maybe, in that when you set off on a journey, knowing where you want to end up and making sure the decisions you take throughout that journey, because throughout that journey, you're always going to have a tangential pull, right?
Right.
However, if you come across an opportunity and you map it against where you should be going, then you realize it's a very binary decision. Does this opportunity take me away from that lighthouse, or does it pull me towards that lighthouse? And I find that when you use that very, very simple methodology, you are more likely to not commit very strategic mistakes in being pulled off course, trying to do something which, you know,
Sorry, I'm interrupting you just because this is really interesting, this lighthouse idea. But I guess in the beginning, in the early days of the journey, you probably met, you know, a person and a client that, you know, that kind of represented a degree of a strategic opportunity. And I guess there you did not have the direction set. What relate a little bit? How did the first international real opportunity happen?
I mean, it is true. It is never very clear at the start, but you do have a basic understanding of where you want to go. So when we set off, and then I said we want to break into the UK market, right? So that it is
the direction was clear.
It's clear. It's clear. Why? Because at that point we're about to join the European Union. This would give us freedom of movement, and to our eyes, maybe naively back then, we thought it would escalate us a little bit in the eyes of the potential client. Our first client, yes, I remember we had taken a stand at an outsourcing exhibition, which at that point was co-sponsored by Malta Enterprise. And again, they were quite pivotal for us, Malta Enterprise, because they did give us the courage to invest the money we needed to make. So we set up shop. The first client came. It was a telecommunications company at that point, a billing company. And with typical Maltese bravado, when they asked us, have you ever worked in telco? Of course, we invented telco, right? I mean, and we managed to land our first client. In hindsight, I can't really see how we managed to do that, because in reality, it was so easy to poke a finger through everything, But the individual and the organization, I think, felt, although we might not know anything about telecom, in fact, the truth was we had the resource and the skill set to deliver it. And bottom line, in the service business, that is what it is about. You know?
So we kind of stretched and took a risk.
Exactly.
And taking a project which was a bit beyond you.
Exactly.
But it proved to be pivotal.
Exactly. And these risk-taking projects, I think, are part and parcel of any entrepreneurial journey, right?
Absolutely.
Because you cannot create the project and find a client. You have to find a client, and this will give you the experience and the industry knowledge to go in there, which comes with a significant amount of risk. But it's not such a big deal in reality, you know.
Exactly, especially if you see it in hindsight, you know, over time.
Exactly.
John, you had kind of your first international, you know, pivotal point, you know, with which kind of project?
Our story is a bit different to Joe, listening to Joe describing his, in the sense that what actually happened was we were working on a particular solution for a specific project for a customer here in Malta. And we were trying to find a technical solution to a challenge that customer had. And we came up with a solution, which was a very valid solution. And at that stage, maybe the lighthouse that Joe spoke about blinked. Because at that particular point, it dawned on me that the type of solution that we were crafting for this particular project had universal applicability. So that particular approach could be put into a product independently of the solution that we were building for that customer, and could be created as a product and sold as a product. And because of the market nature, the only real major market for that product was international. So de facto, it pushed us to look down the international route. So it wasn't so much a customer that had a demand for us to do something and we built something for them. Obviously there was in the case of the project previously, but that was just the triggering of the idea. So I'm a firm believer in what is referred to as opportunity identification. And it really was one of those light bulb moments to actually say, this we could turn into a product. And exactly the same thing happened with our second major international product. So it was, I hope it doesn't sound arrogant to say, the vision of being able to identify that opportunity at an international scale.
And it's always about identifying. Of course, my question to you is, how did you realize back then that turning this into a product, in fact, constituted an opportunity with an international chance, if you like?
Yeah, I think it was literally that light bulb going off, saying this could be created as a product,
right.
And if we did, then the potential demand and the market size opportunity for this product, and the industries in which it could operate, the geographies in which it could operate, were such that it was universal.
Okay.
So what we actually did at that stage was we redeveloped completely from scratch, because developing a project for a customer is a very different thing to developing a product for multiple customers, multilingual, multi-everything. Exactly. So we redeveloped the product from scratch, having first obviously done some competitive analysis and a certain amount of marketing. We didn't create a business plan.
Okay. You went for it first, and then
we went for it for the simple reason that the gut feeling was very, very strong.
Okay.
And we decided to make the investment in developing the product, and the even greater investment in marketing the product. Okay. Because marketing costs more than product development in this particular case.
Yeah. What was the role of the client, and the people on the client side to kind of help you realize that this could be an opportunity which is worth, turning into a product and going out with it?
I don't think there was that input. Okay. The input from the client evolved over time. Okay. As clients that we would be meeting would actually say to you, can the product solve this problem for me, or can it solve that problem for me? And therefore what you do is you identify these extra capabilities that you could build into the project, into the product rather. That itself is a major risk point. Okay. It's a risk point for the simple reason that you can be overly influenced by one particular customer's need.
All right.
And you go down the route of developing and investing into meeting that particular need without actually realizing that that is a need for one customer, but not necessarily so universal.
Exactly.
And therefore making the investment in product development just to meet that customer's need may not necessarily be the best strategic approach.
For the wider kind of project. Yeah.
Correct. So you can actually invest and create excessive functionality, ironically, into the product, which also then makes it more complex for people to understand
to be able to
what it
apply
does.
it widely.
That's a risk.
Yeah. Is it the case, Joe, I'm going to turn a bit to you, that when you kind of develop successfully a strategic opportunity, it kind of becomes easier to develop others as you go along, because you're kind of learning, or every one of these turning points are a story in themselves?
I mean, service provision, right, is quite templatable. The benefit of providing a service versus developing a product with the roadmap and the inputs into the roadmap and the quality is that once you establish a core set of services which you will provide to your clients, you engage in one of two ways. You're either going to take responsibility for the delivery, or you're going to provide the resource. It's one or the other predominantly. Yeah. And in the latter, you do not really have a lot of project responsibility because you're just supplying the resource. Exactly. And when we started off, that is, to a degree, what we wanted to become. Okay. Right? Okay. The challenge.
Of resource, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and here's your supply of developers. The challenge with that is that your value point in the eyes of the client remains very much commodity-based. Yes. Right? So I can buy it cheaper elsewhere because it's a ton of sugar, right?
Exactly.
It is what it is.
But then there was a point in your journey where you kind of shifted completely from that model
into exactly. And that came about in the second or third client set. We started to realize that we are underselling our services because while we're providing the resource, we were also, without knowing it, taking on much more of a value position. And I remember we had a client where we had engaged to deliver a project, and we were hopelessly immature in our calculating what this project really is, right? Because obviously the weakest, the critical point, sorry, in a project is getting the estimate right, yes. Right? So seriously underestimated. We were doing what any small company does, right? As soon as the storms begin to gather around your project, you start taking a defensive position, right? Long story short, client calls us up. I go to the UK, sit down with the client in a boardroom, very large boardroom. You feel really minuscule because this is a strategic client for you. If you lose it, this is a big deal, right? And it's also a confidence play. And in pure defensive mode, you go in with 1,000 reasons why this is not your fault. Right? You've done everything you've asked for, but still we're 3 months behind schedule and hopelessly over budget, right? And again, a pivot moment, the client goes, if that's all you have for me, then sorry, it's the end of the road.
Why did you come here?
Why did you come here, right? But then he said, but if you've come to tell me how together we can work to resolve this, then the floor is yours, right? And that to me was a pivotal point because it changes a mindset, right? Where the perception of value is really hard to understand when you are delivering a service and just look, one day equals X amount of pounds, right? But when you start looking at things from a value proposition and what does this really bring to the clients, to John's point, you start adding functionality. But when you ask yourself, you put yourself in the client's shoes, does this really make sense for the client, right? Because there is a tendency when you're a service provision to actually make the journey longer because it's in your benefit, it's your interest, right? But when you are looking at it from a value perspective, and this was a pivotal point for us, is does it add value to the client? Is there an easier way to do this? Why are we complicating this life? Why are we trying to be purer than pure to build something which has a shelf life of 2 years, right? So looking at things from a value perspective is incredibly important if you're to rise above the chaff, if you're to rise above the commodity players, right? Because there is where you command the better rate.
Absolutely. And in this sense, kind of the client made you realize that, this could be a game you can...
And again, it is to do with the paradigm shift in the way you think, right? We're an insular community,
programmed a bit like
we are exactly. We do not have depth here because the market is relatively shallow, right? So we tend to generalize. This is why you don't
be generalist in what we do.
Of course, you have no other option, right? But if you use it that way, then you tend to start only to look at protecting your commitment, right? Whereas when you have a deeper relationship, a larger relationship, you say, it swings and roundabouts. I can take some pain here, but, it will turn out to no. So this concept of value to me was extremely pivotal, and it still is.
Eye-opener in that sense.
Completely.
This is really interesting. One topic I want to, discuss with you, John, for example, you've been essentially selling a solution to airports for many, many years. In this journey we're discussing, how would you realize that this particular opportunity kind of is more important than others? It has a potential strategic significance for the company, and it's not like any other. How do you kind of take that judgment?
In terms of one client project rather than another client project? Well, you mentioned specifically the airport software that we had developed and launched in 2011 and then was acquired in 2017, which was very much our strategy for acquisition. That particular product area was quite challenging in the sense that, as was the case with the previous product, it was a world first. So we were going into develop a market that did not exist. The software actually allowed airports to manage their retail and food and beverage revenues within the airport space. And previously that was work which was being done very manually using Excel by even companies that had $2 billion worth of turnover.
Right.
So we were creating a product sector that didn't exist. And that in itself is very challenging.
Of course, because you're selling an innovation which is not obvious out there. People are not used to it.
Correct. And also you're proposing a solution, a software-based solution, which will obviously cost money and will replace a solution that they're doing on Excel and therefore has no perceived cost.
Yeah.
Now, I use the word perceived cost because obviously people were taking much longer and not getting as good a quality of information using the Excel-based approach compared to what we were offering. Now, obviously, if you look at it like that, there was a clear correlation between the size of the airport and the value that our solution could provide to that airport. And therefore, certainly the larger the airport, the more attractive the opportunity was. But because our strategy was to go for acquisition, to build...
You knew this from day one, like?
Absolutely.
Your lighthouse.
Yes, absolutely. And everything was, and I completely agree with Joe, you have to keep everything aligned with that vision. What we needed to do was we needed to create a product which was obviously of high quality, backed up by high service, but we needed to build a good reference list of customers, because without a good reference list of customers, the attractiveness of the solution for an acquirer, and we had a story for the acquirer.
The credibility, of course.
Yes, absolutely. So we were very keen to get those reference sites, and we had reference sites which ranged geographically and also in size.
Okay.
And therefore, that in itself was also part of the thinking.
Yeah. But that's the strategy, kind of the proactive strategy from your end. But I guess when you were meeting different people, you were, I guess, taking a judgment. This project could be interesting. It's in an interesting geography. It's a large project, and they were these milestones. How do you take that judgment that this is more important than others?
I think the most difficult judgment to make actually is a slightly different one, which is, are the people that I'm dealing with visionary enough to actually say this is something that can change our business, their business. And if they are visionary, then you can work with them. So for instance, I remember when we did our first soft launch of the product at a conference and an exhibition, that we did a lot of conferences and exhibitions. And as Joe was saying, we also used the services and the support provided by TradeMalta and Malta Enterprise prior to that. When we were actually doing that, there was a particular event at Heathrow where I was a speaker, and there was another speaker on the same panel as me who was the CIO of a very major airport. And we managed to build that relationship, and they actually purchased the product from us. It took a year because these are high ticket values you're talking about.
And the sales cycle is very long. In this
Correct. So you have those people who are visionary that you can...
Who kind of,
Joe, because the value is very clear.
The same thing, you meet someone and...
Yes, but if I may jump into this, because we also had a product ourselves, right? But the story is very different. And now I'm hearing you talk, I'm realizing where. So similar to yourself, we had a product in the postal space, which came about similar to your journey, where we had a client in Malta who wanted that. And we then realized that this has potential because there aren't many suppliers to that industry, particularly the smaller English-speaking islands, right? Which at face value thinks it's a great idea, but when I look, and your question was, how do you decide which is the best opportunity to take? In hindsight, that was the wrong opportunity to take, because whereas in your case, John, you went after a market where the question which I should have asked was, is there money in that market? Do these guys, forget the value proposition for a second, but these guys actually have money to spend? I would have asked that, which we didn't. And although we enrolled 7, 8 different countries with the product, there was no revenue uplift in reality because it's an industry which is dying.
Okay.
Right? So to your point, which choice do you make when you have two products?
Kind of look at the industry in general. So you're saying postal services was a sunset industry anyway, whereas airport revenue was a growing industry. And therefore, it's easy to align with your lighthouse.
Exactly.
Because
I'm not saying it didn't add value to us, just to be clear, because it gave us huge exposure in supporting, you know, a 99.99% uplift uptime product. So a lot of value there. But the choices, for example, you went from 2011 to 2017, which is a short span of time.
Exactly.
I mean, with our product, we did it since 2003, and we've never actually managed to progress. So the focus, the lighthouse, saying this is the industry we're going. You can see the differences in success.
The opportunities are grounded in an industry.
Exactly.
One kind of roundup question, but it's really important for us because of the people who will be listening to this podcast and watching this video is, if you're the entrepreneur yourself, I guess you can, scout opportunities because you have the experience and the networks, etc. But how do you ensure your company, beyond you, if you like, has the same sensitivity, the capability to develop good opportunities, important opportunities? How do you build a structure for that?
I think, again, come back to the lighthouse, right? What do you want to be? So if what you want to be is a good services-based company, with a geographical spread, etc., then the concept of entrepreneurship to a degree is no longer necessary. Why? Because you've established the marks you want to be. Now it's process, right? Now, how do you scale to keep that vision going, right? And to a degree, in my particular case, my role within the organization is now completely non-operational. Right? Why? Because when you get to a certain size, then it is much more difficult to take the kind of risks you would take when you are a smaller organization, right?
So the entrepreneurship becomes less important and the process becomes more important.
Becomes hugely more important because you're going to scale, you have a lighthouse to grow the business and sell it. So we have to get there, and we have to get there in a way where when the buyer comes, our back-end process, our scalability is so strong that he cannot poke fingers through it. So it's a different skill set. The skill set now is let's build it strong.
Exactly.
Right? So it can take the punishment, which effectively means you then need to move sideways and use your entrepreneurial skills, in other areas, right?
And grow new kind of avenues.
Exactly. I actually think if you have too much entrepreneurship in a very solid kind of business, it will tear it apart. Because it will take you away from your lighthouse title. I'm going to create this app. And off you go on your horse.
You can't be a startup and be a large company.
You cannot.
You agree with this, John?
Well, Joe's business and his sector, although we're both in the IT sector, we're very different. We do very different things. So we strategically took a decision over 20 years ago to become a software products company rather than a software services company, as Joe's company is. So that in itself makes puts us in very different situations. Obviously, process is absolutely important always, but the main point is the ability to identify those opportunities. Different people stand at the top of a mountain and they look out on a landscape, and different people are seeing different things in that same landscape. And what you've got to do is hone, or I believe at least, you've got to hone the skills of people to be able to identify those things in that landscape that have that core from which you can develop the value. The value for the customer and the value for the business itself, and those should always be aligned. And if you ask, how do you teach that? I'm not sure you can, to be honest. I think it's something that some people have and some people don't, and that's fine. But it's important to have a good mix of people within the business who have that ability to identify those opportunities. And I'm also a strong believer in niche opportunities, particularly because we come from companies which are small in the overall scheme of things internationally, it's very important, I believe, to actually operate within niche markets. All our products, like the airport industry, is a niche.
It's a niche,
they have their own
global niche in this sense.
Correct. They have their own exhibitions, they have their own trade magazines, they have conferences which are going, which you can utilize as your marketing channel.
So kind of the network is closed, even though it's a global network.
It's more of a sort of laser approach rather than shotgun approach.
Absolutely.
And I think that's worked well for us.
Exactly. Listen, this is really interesting and exciting. We're kind of chasing, or time is chasing us in this sense, but I'll give you time for, one word of advice for a company out there interested in internationalizing, given the journeys and how successful you were in your case. What's your, bottom line, or one word or one, sentence of advice?
I would go with what I started with, right? Lighthouse, laser focus on where you're going, and don't let anything distract you. Bil-Malti, I think the best way to put it, tarax kbir. Right? So if you're going to go international, don't go and try in 7 countries. Just pick one choice. That's the lighthouse. Doesn't mean you cannot stop and validate where you are. Right? And pivot if you need to, but keep that, because that is also really important for the people in the engine room. Right, who want to understand the vision of where you're going.
The whole thing is going.
Because if you don't, it's never going to work.
Absolutely.
That would be it for me.
Joe, thanks.
I would say that don't underestimate the amount of effort and marketing that you need to, and money rather, that you need to put into marketing and promotion to reach your market and to be credible, not appear credible, but be credible. You have to actually project the right image. You need to invest in that area. And be careful, I would say, of very small steps, hoping that it will go well, and then you'll invest in the marketing. At the same time, don't make the giant steps. So you have to get the pace,
the balance,
the pace right. I think, and the niche helps in that.
In that context as well.
Yes.
Great. Joseph, John, thanks for sharing your experience here on International Insights. That was Joseph Sultana and John DeGiorgio on how their companies grew thanks to some strategic opportunities. If you found this podcast useful, we have others on managing a crisis, on nurturing talent, and on the imperative of being digital. You can find them on Spotify under International Insight, or in video format on YouTube. This podcast series is produced for TradeMalta. It's made possible thanks to HSBC and their international business financing solutions. We get technical help from Studio 7. Thanks for being with us.